In the dim light of early dawn, the courtyard of Winterfell stirred with a quiet sense of expectation. A fine layer of frost blanketed the flagstones, catching the faint glow from the sky as the first hint of sunrise crept over the eastern horizon. Stable hands moved in hushed efficiency, brushing down horses and squires readying themselves for another day. The entire castle seemed to hold its breath, as though it had been waiting a long time for this day, and scarcely believed it was here. In the great hall, the air was cool and still. Dust motes floating where lantern light streamed in. Jon Snow, who was not Jon Snow at all but Aegon Targaryen by right of blood, stood near the high table, hands braced on the solid time-worn wood, lost in thought. He wore a simple cloak of thick gray wool, trimmed with fur to stave off the sharp northern cold. His hair, grown longer than in the days when he was simply the bastard of Winterfell, tumbled in dark waves around his face. The faint lines near his eyes spoke not so much of age but of the burdens he had carried these past years. He had won battles, forged alliances, and endured betrayals. Yet what awaited him now felt like a different kind of conflict. This was the forging of a new bond, a political one, but also a bond that held a unique place in his heart. The rest of the household had begun to stir, and he could sense movements behind him. A swirl of skirts, the low murmur of voices from the hall's far corners. The North had recognized him as a leader in their darkest times, but not all accepted his Targaryen heritage wholeheartedly. There were those who whispered behind closed doors that his claim threatened the memory of House Stark. Others, who had witnessed his leadership against the White Walkers, believed him the rightful king in the North, Targaryen or not. But the question of unity loomed. Alliances had been formed under dire circumstances that had lessened now that the existential threats had been subdued. People began to ask, would the North remain loyal to a Targaryen king if there was no further danger? What better way to cement that loyalty, some said, than to bind House Targaryen to House Stark through marriage? Jon leaned forward, his breath a soft cloud in the chilly great hall. Even after everything, the war, the revelations of his birth, the uneasy acceptance of many a lord, he found that part of him still longed for the sense of belonging that had so often eluded him. And this marriage, though formed partly by necessity, would give him a bond with the family he had always known as his own. He told himself it was not incest at all. He was a Targaryen, true, but by circumstance, not by the ties that bound him to the Starks in a brotherly or sisterly way. That distinction mattered more than words could express, both for politics and for the strange pang inside him whenever he thought of Arya Stark. They had grown up side by side. She had been the fierce, quick-eyed girl who refused to stay in her place, always running through the courtyard, wooden sword in hand. She had teased him, confided in him. There was always a camaraderie that set her apart from her other siblings, even from her beloved half-sister Sansa. Arya, for her part, had seen in Jon a reflection of her own sense of otherness. He was called a bastard. She was a girl who preferred archery to needlework. That small corner of the castle yard behind the stables had been their refuge, where they practiced sparring in secret. They were comfortable together, even when entire winters passed without them seeing each other. Now, the world had changed. They were older. Shadows of war etched upon their faces. Arya had returned from her own treacherous journeys, having seen horrors in far-off lands that most northerners could only imagine in their worst nightmares. She carried knives at her belt with a lightness that spoke of deadly skill, and her gray eyes, once dancing with childhood mischief, now held a guarded intensity. Jon knew there was more behind those eyes than she let on, and he sensed that even if they were to share a life in the sight of the entire North, she might keep parts of herself locked away. She was resilient, complicated, and strong, and she was a Stark, stubbornly tied to the legacy of her house. Marrying her was more than a matter of politics. It was a vow that might unite two legacies. Yet, how did Arya feel about this? That question, echoing in Jon's mind, never found a straightforward answer. She had agreed in her brusque way to the proposition. That acceptance had been overshadowed by 1,000 unspoken words. Jon wondered if she had done it purely out of duty, or if there was something deeper that neither dared articulate. Perhaps the road she had traveled left her with a sense that the illusions of love and tenderness were for those more naive. And yet, he caught glimpses of something when she looked at him. A fleeting warmth, a memory from simpler days that still glowed in her guarded heart. He thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, he found no one. The great hall was beginning to fill with the early routine of Winterfell. Though no formal meal had begun, guards stood near the doors. Lords and ladies whispered in clusters, some drifting glances toward him, no doubt conjuring stories about the Targaryen who was once Ned Stark's ward. The hush of speculation hung over the hall like morning fog. The wedding would not be for some weeks yet. They had time to plan, to gather lords from throughout the north, to set forth invitations to certain key houses in the south as well. The entire realm needed to see this alliance as a sign of peace and stability, or so claimed the advisors who hovered near Sansa, who still ruled Winterfell's internal matters with a deft hand. Jon sometimes marveled at the transformation of his once timid half-sister, but that wonderment was overshadowed by the swirl of demands upon him. Council sessions, emissaries to receive, taxes to collect, disputes to settle. Even in this period of relative calm, the kingdom was far from quiet. Soon, he would need to meet with Sansa, Bran and Arya in the old solar where the Starks once gathered around Ned's large polished table. In that meeting, everything about the wedding, dowry, feast, vows, would be formalized. Jon felt the full weight of it. It was not a typical wedding arrangement, for it carried the fate of the North and the Targaryen name upon its shoulders. Even though the realm was at peace, the wounds left by war ran deep. The memory of Daenerys' final days, her quest for the Iron Throne, and the burning of King's Landing lingered in corners of the realm's collective mind. Though Jon himself had parted ways with that vision, acknowledging that the North needed independence and a more measured leadership, the stigma of the Targaryen name had not vanished entirely. Perhaps, in a union with Arya, the North would finally rest assured that the spirit of House Stark continued to guide its future. He exhaled, stepping away from the high table. It would not do to appear lost in grim thoughts. This was to be a unifying event, and he should exude confidence and steadiness. Tugging the cloak closer around his shoulders, Jon made his way toward the courtyard to clear his mind before the day's discussions began. Outside, the biting wind greeted him, but he'd grown used to it. In the center, a few soldiers were practicing with wooden swords, while a handful of watchers in thick fur cloaks cheered or gave pointers. Jon offered them a curt nod and strode toward the weirwood in the distance. Winterfell's Godswood had always been a place of quiet reflection. Now, with snow drifting gently from the sky, it looked like a realm trapped between seasons. Some branches still bearing the last withered leaves, others coated in glittering ice. The heart tree stood tall, red leaves rustling softly. The carved face looked upon him as if trying to share in his burdens, or perhaps judge them. He sank to one knee and lowered his head for a moment of silent introspection. He remembered the first time he'd knelt here, a boy of little consequence who simply wanted to belong. If only that boy could see him now. The irony stung. He had discovered that he belonged to a royal lineage, that the throne of all Westeros was once thought to be his destiny. Yet he did not covet that throne. His path, it seemed, was something quieter and more complex, and part of it now involved Arya. Aegon Targaryen, came a soft voice behind him. He knew the voice at once and felt a twist in his stomach. He stood and turned, meeting Arya's gaze. She wore a subdued cloak, her dark hair braided loosely over one shoulder. Her face, angular and fierce, reflected the morning's pale light. She studied him with a hint of wary amusement, as if to say, "We both know these formalities are not what define us." He inclined his head. "You know, I never truly got used to that name," he said quietly. Arya stepped closer, her footsteps careful on the snowy ground. "It's who you are, even if it doesn't feel that way. We all have parts of ourselves we never asked for. You think I asked to become what I became?" She looked away, perhaps recalling the many faces she had worn, and the many dark corners of the world she had ventured into. He recognized the tension behind her words, the unspoken weight she carried. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know this. Arrangement is not an easy thing for you." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it contained any warmth. You think I fear marrying you? I've seen too much to be afraid of something as ordinary as a wedding. But let's not pretend we're the same people who once stood in this godswood as children. So much has changed. He nodded, a pang of regret mingling with acceptance. I know, he said, scanning her face. He wished he could reach out and brush his hand against her cheek, the way one might comfort a dear friend, but something in her stance held him at bay. The old familiarity was there, but it was cloaked in caution. They stood in silence for a moment. The hush of falling snow was their only companion. The heart tree loomed behind them, centuries of stark memory carved into its face. She said, "Is this truly what you want?" John took in a breath, allowing the cold air to fill his lungs. I want the North united. I want the people safe. I want House Stark to remain strong. And the counsel of many is that this marriage will do just that. As for you and me," he paused, words forming in his throat before he spoke them. "I care for you, Arya. More than I can explain. But I won't force you into anything you can't abide." Her gray eyes flickered, tension tight around her mouth. "I was never one for abiding," she said with a touch of that old stubbornness. Then she softened, just enough for him to sense that old spark of closeness. "I agreed to this. I keep my word. But I've never seen myself as the lady of any great house. That's Sansa's domain. When I think of marriage, I think of all the things I never wanted to be. I hope we can do this on our own terms." "That about her?" John nodded. "We will." She lowered her gaze, letting the swirl of her cloak hide her form. "I'll see you later in the solar. We have details to work out. The lords will want to see a show of courtesy at least." With a final measured look, she turned and left him there beside the heart tree. As her footsteps faded, John found himself exhaling in relief, mixed with an anxious excitement. They had grown so far beyond the boundaries of childhood, and yet here they were, about to enter a bond that might anchor their fates together more tightly than they could have imagined. He stayed a while longer, gathering his thoughts, letting the godswood silence ease the knot in his chest. Then he made his way back through the courtyard, greeting a few guards and minor lords who approached with respectful nods. Though the official announcements had not been made, rumors flew like ravens. Everyone knew something monumental was in the air. By mid-morning, John reached the old solar. It was a room of sturdy stone walls hung with tapestries depicting long-ago Stark victories, tattered at the edges from centuries of wear. A fire crackled in the hearth, throwing out much-needed warmth. Bran was already there, seated in his wheeled chair near the far side, gazing into the distance as he so often did these days, his own eyes seeming to see far beyond the walls of Winterfell. Sansa, poised in a high-backed chair near the hearth, looked up and offered John a polite, yet somewhat guarded smile. She had grown adept at wearing a mask of calm practicality, no longer the naive girl, but a woman shaped by trials. Arya stood off to the side, one hand on the table, eyes roving over a map that lay spread before her. She did not glance up when John entered. Instead, she was tracing a route with her fingertip as if trying to memorize it. He couldn't help but wonder where her mind wandered. Some old path she traveled alone, or a new mission best left unnamed. Sansa broke the silence. "John? Good. We were just discussing the invitation list for the wedding." She motioned to a partially unrolled scroll. The writing was small and neat. "You know as well as I that we need the support of key houses. If we can get House Glover, House Mannerly, and House Serwyn all here, it will make a strong statement. But there's more. Some southern lords may also come, though it's uncertain. That's your domain now, more than mine." John moved closer, scanning the names. "We must be careful which southern houses we invite," he said. "Some alliances are too fresh, others too frayed. We don't want to host those who might undermine us." "Nan," Arya glanced up then, her expression almost defiant. "And we wouldn't want our wedding to become a stage for their political intrigues," she added, a slight edge in her voice. Sansa folded her hands in her lap, ignoring Arya's tone. There's no escaping political intrigues when one rules, especially with a wedding of this magnitude. But we can manage them carefully, with caution. Near the hearth, Bran shifted in his chair, turning his gaze upon John. There was something timeless in those eyes, as though he were not entirely present in the conversation. "The North remembers," Bran said softly. "Words measured, and it will remember this wedding." Jon gave a small nod. He had grown used to Bran's cryptic statements, though they still sent a prickle down his spine. "We'll do our best to ensure that memory is a good one." They spent the next hour or more discussing the logistics of the ceremony. Winterfell's Great Hall was large enough to host a sizable gathering, yet the feasting might stretch over several days, with tents erected in the courtyard for overflow guests, as was the old custom in the north. The conversation shifted to which priests would officiate. Sansa favored a northern-style ceremony with the old gods, but there was also mention that some southern lords would feel more at ease if a septon gave a blessing. Bran seemed indifferent, though he acknowledged the symbolic importance. Arya, for her part, kept silent, occasionally casting Jon an unreadable look. He sensed her tension. Talk of the wedding's pomp and protocol clearly did not thrill her. When the topic turned to the practical elements, food stores, the local harvest, how many barrels of ale and wine might be needed, Jon listened but allowed Sansa to take the lead. She knew Winterfell's supplies better than anyone. He was relieved to see she handled it with the same diligence she gave to every pressing matter. Even as he sat there, a swirl of emotions anchored him. This was happening. The North's watchful eyes were upon him, and Arya. Allies across Westeros would be sending ravens to confirm, deny, or question. He braced himself for the wave of scrutiny soon to wash over them. At last, Sansa carefully rolled up the scroll. "We'll need to finalize these lists within a week to send out the ravens in time. We should also prepare for a few unexpected arrivals." She shifted her gaze between Jon and Arya. "I can handle the rest if you like. You might want to discuss your own preferences for the ceremony. After all," she added with a faint, knowing smile, "it is your wedding." Arya offered a half-snort, half-laugh. "I have no taste for decorative garlands or fancy gowns, if that's what you mean. Keep it simple." Sansa's composure remained as she folded her hands. "We'll keep it as you wish, sister, but do remember the symbolic value for the rest of the realm. A certain amount of ceremony can be useful." Arya shrugged, her voice light with something close to mockery. "Useful, right?" She glanced at Jon. "Is that how you see this too? A useful spectacle to keep everyone in line?" Jon stood, letting out a slow breath. "It's more than that. You know it is. But I won't deny that it's partly for others to see. It's how alliances work. Right now, we need every scrap of unity we can get. Too many divisions remain from the war." Next, their eyes locked, a moment of mutual understanding. Then Arya broke away, turning to stare into the fire. Bran's quiet presence loomed in the background, offering neither comment nor reassurance, simply observing. For a heartbeat, the silence in the solar was profound, almost suffocating. Finally, Sansa rose, smoothing her skirts. "I have other matters to attend to. Bran, come with me. We need to meet the new maester and see about the library's records." She glanced meaningfully at Jon and Arya, as though encouraging them to talk without an audience. Bran nodded, rolling his chair toward the door with surprising ease, his expression distant yet thoughtful. As the two of them left, the heavy wooden door closed softly, leaving Jon and Arya alone. She turned, leaning her back against the edge of the table. Her arms were crossed loosely over her chest. "Well, we're to be wed. No escaping it now, is there?" Jon studied her guarded posture. "Is it so terrible?" he asked quietly. "Have I become that monstrous in your eyes?" A faint smile tugged at her lips, though it did not reach her eyes. "No. You've never been monstrous. That's not what I mean. You were the one I looked up to, the one who let me be myself when no one else did. It's just that marriage was never something I thought would happen to me. I thought my life would go a different way." He took a step closer, resting his hand on the table. "A life of adventure, perhaps. Of traveling the world." She seemed momentarily lost in memory. "I traveled," she said, her voice hushed. "But it wasn't the sort of adventure that leaves you with happy tales to tell by the fireside. It changed me, Jon." He inclined his head. "We've all changed. None of us are who we were before. But that doesn't mean we can't." He halted, realizing he was about to say something too sentimental, something that might push her away. Instead, he chose his words carefully. "It doesn't mean we can't still find moments of peace, or build something worthwhile." Arya looked down at her hands, then closed them into fists, as though to ground herself. "I know. I'm not running away. I made this choice. I'll keep to it." Another pause, then a flicker of resolve hardened her features. "We'll do what's needed, and maybe we can manage something that's not entirely for show." Jon felt warmth stir in his chest. He reached out, hesitating before letting his hand gently touch hers. Her skin was cool, but she did not flinch away. They stood like that for a moment, the flickering firelight illuminating their faces. He could not help recalling the little girl in the courtyard who once asked him to help her shoot an arrow, the bright spark in her eyes unquenchable. That spark still burned, albeit changed by time and hardship. She pulled her hand away, clearing her throat. "There are archery drills in the courtyard. I want to watch." Jon nodded. "Of course. I'll go meet with Lord Serwyn's messenger. He arrived this morning and I should speak with him about the wedding details." A small irony tugged at his mouth. He was discussing wedding details with everyone but his intended bride. But that was the way of things in these times. "You'll join me for supper?" She nodded. "Yes. If we're to present a united front, might as well start at the dinner table." "Nice." He gave her a faint, acknowledging smile. As she slipped out the door, he watched her depart. Each step measured, her form tall and lean in the wavering glow of the corridor's torchlight. His heart gave a slight twist of doubt. Could a union forged by political necessity truly blossom into something deeper? He did not dare hope too openly. Too many times had hope been a treacherous companion. Still, he could not entirely banish the faint sense of wonder that they, of all people, should find themselves in this moment. In the next hours, Jon lost himself in the usual swirl of duties. Winterfell was abuzz with small crises and demands. A stablemaster requesting more feed for the horses, a steward complaining about the need for additional staff to handle the influx of guests, a blacksmith needing more iron shipments from White Harbor. At every turn, Jon found himself asked about the wedding. Servants wanted to know if he had preferences for the menu. Visitors inquired about whether the bride would wear a cloak of stark gray or Targaryen red. Some brazenly asked whether the king in the north, if that was still his title, planned to accept a crown. He kept his answers short and measured, letting them see only calm assurance. Yet beneath his exterior, an undercurrent of tension ran. This wedding loomed over every conversation, overshadowing even the daily governance. Some part of him wished they could slip away, he and Arya, and conduct a simple ceremony in the Godswood, witnessed by no one but the Heart Tree. But that was not how the world worked, not for them. At dusk, he finally made his way to the great hall for supper. The lanterns had been lit, casting dancing shadows across the walls. As predicted, the gathering was larger than usual. Lords from the neighboring houses had come to discuss the wedding, to confirm their allegiances, and to glean any advantage they could. Long trestle tables had been set, laden with roasted meats, hearty winter vegetables, and fresh bread. The smell of spiced wine filled the air, warming the chilly hall. Jon took his seat at the high table. Sansa was already there, speaking quietly with Lord Glover, who gestured animatedly as he spoke of his house's readiness to offer resources for the festivities. A hush fell when Arya entered a moment later. She wore a plain tunic and trousers beneath her cloak. Hardly the attire of a lady, but no one dared comment. There was something in her bearing, the way she carried needle at her hip as if it belonged there, that made even the boldest refrain from trifling remarks. She approached the high table with a step both confident and informal, and took her seat beside Jon. Courtesies were exchanged, toasts offered to House Stark, and, somewhat more warily, to House Targaryen. Jon could feel curious stares from men and women across the hall. It was as if everyone waited to see how he and Arya would act together. They spoke in low voices, largely about trivial matters. The quality of the roast, the mildness of the winter so far, the gossip swirling about an impending marriage between a southern lord and a lady of the Vale. Yet beneath the surface, Every small motion, when John leaned closer, or Arya offered a brief laugh at something he said, seemed to send ripples through the watchful crowd. From time to time, Sansa or one of the visiting lords tried to steer the conversation toward wedding plans. Arya answered politely, though her replies were terse. When pressed about her wedding attire, she deflected, pointing to more essential matters, such as the wedding feast's security or the state of the roads leading to Winterfell. Lord Glover looked perplexed at her priorities, but Sansa simply took over, guiding the conversation to keep it from grinding to an awkward halt. Eventually, the meal wound down. Servants began to clear away platters, replacing them with mulled wine or cider. People formed clusters, discussing the day's events or exchanging bits of news. John noticed a few lords requesting a private audience with him, but he shook his head, excusing himself with a respectful apology. For once, he wanted to step away from the constant swirl. He had no doubt that formalities could wait until tomorrow. He caught Arya's eye, and she arched a brow. "Escaping already?" she teased, just loud enough for him to hear. "Walk with me?" he asked in return. She hesitated. Eyes flicked their way, but it was none of anyone's business. She pushed back her chair. "All right." They left the great hall amid a hush of curious stares, two figures stepping into the chilly corridors of Winterfell. The torches lit their path, flickering orange against the stone. The corridors felt familiar, yet filled with echoes of the past. They made their way to the courtyard, where the night sky stretched out overhead, clouded but with a scattering of stars. Arya crossed her arms against the cold. "Everyone's looking at us, you realize?" He nodded, glancing at the battlements. "They always do. Especially now. People thrive on speculation. If we can't give them absolute certainty, they'll invent rumors." A faint smile curved her lips. "Let them invent. I don't care what they think they know about me. They know nothing." The echo of her childhood mantra, "They know nothing," made John's chest tighten with a bittersweet twinge, reminding him of how they once shared secrets no one else understood. He led her past the stables, where a pair of horses nickered softly. A young stable boy, bowing in their direction, quickly busied himself with a brush and rag. The castle walls cast long shadows across the snow-strewn ground. When they reached a quieter corner, near the training yard, John turned to her. "How are you truly feeling, Arya? Not just about the wedding. About everything. Being back in Winterfell." Seeing the north under a different peace, she looked around, her breath puffing in the cold air. "Winterfell is home, but it's not the home I left behind. It can't be. Too much has changed. Sometimes I almost envy Sansa. She has a knack for restoring a sense of order and tradition. She can fit herself into the role. Me, I'm still restless." Nan. John remembered the stories he'd heard, whispers of how Arya had traveled across the sea, training under strange and lethal tutors, learning to become a person without a face. He couldn't imagine how she managed to reconcile that life with the one here. "Restless is not always a bad thing," he said. "Sometimes we need that to remind us of what matters." She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "And what matters to you, now that you've discovered your Targaryen blood, that you have claims to more than just the North?" He shrugged. "Titles don't matter to me as much as ensuring people are safe, that the realm has some respite from war. My father, Nand Stark, raised me to protect the people under my care. That's all I've ever wanted to do, Targaryen or not." Arya nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the battered wooden targets at the far end of the yard. "We should spar sometime, for old time's sake," she said, a hint of a challenge in her tone. "To remind ourselves what we were before the world decided to label us with crowns and duties." A grin tugged at his lips. "You'd likely best me. You always were quick." "Nashta." She lifted a shoulder, half smiling in a way that suggested she believed it. Then the smile faded, replaced by seriousness. "Sometimes I wonder, if we had known back then, all those years ago, that you were a Targaryen, would it have changed how we treated you? Would you have gone away sooner?" John shifted. "I don't know. Maybe it would have changed everything. Or maybe it would have changed nothing. And Ned Stark would have still kept my identity hidden for my sake, for the sake of peace. Hard to say. She stared at a torch's flame flickering in the frosty breeze. "I'm glad you were raised here," she said at length. "Despite everything, you're still my—" She caught herself, as if unsure how to label him now. He saw the slightest tinge of uncertainty flicker over her face. He reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know." The unspoken sentiment lingered in the air. They were neither full siblings nor strangers, but they were bound by a history that ran deeper than simple bloodlines. For a moment, they stood there in quiet accord. Snow began to drift again, thin flakes sparkling where the torches lit the yard. The hush of winter fell at night enveloped them, holding the ghosts of 1,000 moments from their shared youth. John felt the urge to draw her closer, unsure if she would welcome that. He suspected she would not, but the desire to comfort her, to find comfort in her, lurked beneath his composure. In the quiet, Arya let out a breath that curled into the cold air. "We should go in. People will be waiting, and I don't want Sansa sending a search party for us." John nodded, though some part of him wished they could remain out here until dawn, away from all the eyes upon them. They walked back in companionable silence. For now, that might be all they could manage. Small steps toward bridging the gap between their memories and this new reality. As they parted ways in the castle corridor, she heading to the rooms that had once been hers, he to the ones that had been set aside for him. John felt a complex tangle of emotions unraveling in his chest. There was relief that they could still speak with some measure of closeness. There was anxiety about the weight of the vows they were soon to make. And beneath it all, a sense of quiet yearning he could not fully explain. He entered his chamber, a fire already lit in the hearth. Ghost, his albino direwolf, lay curled near the warmth, ears perked when John stepped inside. The loyal creature watched him with bright red eyes, as if sensing his uncertainty. John gave the wolf a soft pat on the head, then removed his cloak and gloves. The wedding day was yet some weeks away. He had time to shape this alliance, to prepare himself for the new path. Still, the knowledge pressed heavily on his mind. He raked a hand through his hair, stirring embers of memory. Arya's laughter, her sharp wit, her unyielding spirit, and the echo of the promise they were making. The vow to stand together for the sake of a realm that had endured too much. Could that vow become something genuine, something that transcended the demands of lords and ladies? John closed his eyes, recalling the way her hand felt beneath his in the solar. In that single touch had been a flicker of trust, or at least understanding. Perhaps that was enough to begin with. If they were to walk this road, they would do so as two people who knew each other's secrets and scars, who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and still found a sense of belonging by each other's side. He settled into a chair near the fire, Ghost gentle, breathing a steady background lull. Outside, the wind rattled against the shutters, but the storm was mild for a northern winter. The castle stones groaned softly in the night's chill. In the days to come, preparations would intensify. More lords would arrive. The kitchens would bustle with endless tasks. The yard would be filled with new tents and wagons. Raven after raven would depart Winterfell, carrying news of the impending union to every corner of Westeros. All of that was bigger than him and Arya. Yet at the core of this whirlwind stood two people who had once believed themselves siblings, each now shaped by destinies neither had chosen. If the realm demanded their marriage, then so be it. They would do it on their own terms, forging a bond neither wholly political nor forced. They had seen enough of manipulation and duty to last a lifetime. Perhaps in those fleeting moments when they let down their guards, they would find a thread of genuine care, something that might anchor them through the storms that inevitably lay ahead. John let the fire's warmth seep into him. For the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed a small ember of hope to burn in his heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, more prying questions. But for now, with Ghost dozing at his side and the quiet hush of Winterfell around him, he let himself imagine a future in which the North found lasting peace. And in that peace, perhaps he and Arya could discover a place to stand together, not just as a symbol for others, but as something real. The crackle of the fireplace was like a lullaby. and the weight of the day's events pressed heavily upon him. His eyes drifted shut, and as he hovered on the edge of sleep, his final conscious thought was of Arya. Her fierce gray eyes, the determination in her voice. She had returned to Winterfell altered by her trials, just as he had been altered by his. Yet the bond they shared was still alive, even if made complex by truth, duty, and the uncertain future that awaited them both. In the gentle darkness behind his eyelids, he allowed himself the simple pleasure of believing that somehow, in some way, they would find their path forward together. Naika. The morning came quietly, as it often did in the north, with a pearly light that seeped around shutters and under doors before the sun's rays ever grew strong. Jon woke in his chamber with Ghost stretched out beside the hearth. The fire had died to embers, and the chill in the air immediately reminded him of where he was. He rose, rubbing sleep from his eyes, feeling the memory of last night's conversation with Arya settle in his mind. There had been no dramatic breakthroughs, no sudden declarations or confessions, yet something about the way they had spoken left him with a small ember of hope. They were forging a path forward, even if it remained uncertain. He dressed in plain clothing, pulling on warm breeches and a thick doublet, buckling his sword belt with a well-practiced motion. The halls lay still, but he knew that soon Winterfell would be alive with voices, footsteps, and the constant demands that came with overseeing a castle on the cusp of a major event. The wedding might still be weeks away, but time moved swiftly when there were so many preparations and so many demands on their attention. He stepped out into the corridor, nodding to the guard posted near his door, an older man who offered a polite inclination of his head. Beyond, the castle began to stir. Down one passage, he heard the clang of pots from the kitchens and the brisk orders of cooks, preparing the first meal of the day. Through the arched windows, he glimpsed a courtyard softened by a light dusting of fresh snow, footprints from night patrols forming crisscross patterns near the main gate. He made his way to the small council chamber. It was not as grand as the great hall, but served well for day-to-day meetings. Inside, he found Sansa leaning over a sheaf of parchment by the window, her auburn hair pinned back neatly. She was scanning lines of text and did not immediately hear him enter. Near her, an attendant waited with a quill, ready to note down any instructions. Jon paused a moment, observing the determined expression on her face. It struck him again how far she had come from the girl who once dreamed of southern courts and chivalrous knights. Now, she was a leader, her practicality shaped by countless lessons of betrayal and survival. "Sansa," he said softly, "you're up early." She glanced up, a thin smile appearing as she recognized him. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, setting aside the parchment. "Too many things to manage. The wedding draws near, and we have lords arriving sooner than expected. Also, your friend from White Harbor, Lord Manderley, sent word he'll come earlier to finalize some shipping agreements for the feast. There's the question of how to lodge them all properly. We'll need to ensure the outskirts of the castle can hold enough tents." Jon nodded, stepping closer. He could see the tension in her shoulders. "Do you need me to handle any of it personally?" Sansa looked mildly relieved by the offer. "Actually, yes. Lord Serwyn's steward wants to speak with you. Something about the granaries and ensuring we have enough winter stores left over, so that the wedding feast won't compromise the castle's supplies. And I suspect you'd rather talk to him than have me deal with it alone." "Yes." He gave a hint of a smile. "I'll do it. I'll meet him in the courtyard after breakfast." Her gaze drifted over his shoulder, as though searching for something else. "Have you seen Arya this morning?" "Not yet," Jon said. "Perhaps she's off taking her morning exercise or practicing with the archers. She mentioned she might." "Dal O'Hearn." Sansa nodded, though her lips pressed together in a tight line. She's never been one to follow the normal schedule. "No matter. The day's just beginning. We have time, so long as we keep everything orderly." He placed a reassuring hand on Sansa's arm. "You've done well, truly. I'll see to these matters. Let's meet later once the morning's business is done, and we can plan how to greet the earliest arrivals." She nodded, exhaling a slow breath that spoke of both relief and the endless list of tasks swirling in her mind. "Thank you, Jon," she said gently. "I'm not sure I ever said it, but I'm glad you're here to share this responsibility." He gave her a small smile, then turned to go. As he departed the room, he overheard the attendant promptly begin asking Sansa about supplies of lamp oil and the new maester's inventory of healing herbs. He knew she would handle it all with the calm diligence she had developed through the chaos of recent years. Jon made his way to the great hall, where servants were laying out a modest breakfast: bowls of porridge, fresh bread, and a bit of smoked fish. A handful of lesser lords and knights were already seated, talking in low tones about the coming weeks. Some looked up, offering respectful nods as Jon passed. He returned the gesture, taking a seat near the end of one long table. He was not especially fond of formal seating arrangements in the morning. Let the lords and knights mingle where they would. It was far more comfortable than everyone standing on ceremony at dawn. He helped himself to some porridge sweetened with honey, chewing slowly as he let his mind wander to the tasks ahead. He wondered if Arya would appear for breakfast, or if she preferred to avoid these gatherings. More likely, she'd snag a roll from the kitchens on her way to the training yard. Arya had never liked pointless ceremony, and that aversion hadn't changed with age. Sure enough, as he was finishing his meal, he heard the low hum of voices intensify. He glanced over his shoulder and spotted Arya slipping into the hall, moving with a light step that barely seemed to stir the rushes on the floor. She wore a fitted leather jerkin over dark woolen breeches, a practical outfit for one who might well head out for training. Needle was secured at her hip, though partly concealed by the cloak draped over her shoulders. Several sets of eyes followed her, and Jon could see the flickers of curiosity. The bride-to-be carrying a sword in open view. But no one dared say a word. She gave Jon a small nod and drifted to the table to pour herself a cup of hot tea. A few men made space for her, but she only paused long enough to snatch a heel of bread and a piece of fruit before weaving away. Jon pushed to his feet, crossing to intercept her. "Escaping already?" he asked in a quiet voice. Arya took a bite of the bread, chewing with the faintest smirk. "I've grown accustomed to wide spaces in the morning. These halls are too full of eyes." She glanced around at the knights and lords, many of whom pretended not to watch them, even as they leaned in to whisper among themselves. Jon nodded. "Care for company on your walk?" Her gray eyes flicked to his. She hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "If you like. I'm heading to the training yard. You can spare with me, unless you fear you'll miss your meeting." "No." He glanced at the overhead rafters, as though calculating the time. "The steward can wait a short while. I won't keep you long." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "All right then, let's go." They left together, stepping into the chill air of the courtyard. Several men-at-arms were drilling with wooden swords, their instructor barking commands. The crisp snow made every sound distinct. A clang of metal, a grunt of exertion, a nervous laugh from a young recruit who had just stumbled. Stables to their left, the armory to their right, and in the center was a modest practice area with straw and wood dummies. A large ring of compacted snow marked where sparring bouts typically took place. A few of the men paused to bow to Jon, acknowledging him with respectful nods. Arya's presence drew a different response. Wariness, curiosity, sometimes awe. Rumor had long since spread about the ghost of the North. Stories of her skill with a blade. She ignored the stares and unclasped her cloak, handing it to a nearby squire without a word of explanation. Underneath, her attire was even simpler than Jon had realized. Soft leather bracers, sturdy boots, and no ornamentation save for the wolf's head pin that held her jerkin closed. She rolled her shoulders, flexed her hands, then shifted her weight, testing her stance on the packed snow. "If you prefer a blunt sword for sparring, there's a rack near the armory," she said, gesturing. Jon eyed Needle's slender blade. "Will you be using live steel?" She arched a brow. "I don't believe in half measures. If you're worried, I promise not to hurt you too much." He let out a small laugh, despite the tension in the air. "I'll fetch a training blade," he said, crossing to the rack. He chose a blade that mirrored Longclaw in size and weight, but with dulled edges. Testing its heft, he turned back toward her. "Shall we?" They stepped into the makeshift ring, forming a circle that a few onlookers started to gather around. Wordlessly, they saluted one another with their swords. John felt the old thrill of anticipation. He had sparred with many foes, living and dead. But the idea of crossing blades with Arya felt oddly personal, like stepping into a memory from their younger years, yet layered with the knowledge that she had traveled far beyond anything he could imagine. She moved first. Arya's style was unlike most trained warriors. She was quick, fluid, darting in and out of reach with a series of feints that kept him guessing. John shifted his footing on the slick surface, raising his blade to parry. The ring of steel echoed across the yard. She pivoted, making for his side, but he turned to meet her attack, controlling the center of the ring as best he could. She danced back, her breath puffing in the cold air. He pressed forward with a controlled strike to test her defenses. She swayed aside, letting the blade whisk past, then countered swiftly, forcing him to parry again. Their footsteps wove a pattern across the snow, each circling and probing, neither fully committing in the initial moments. He was mindful of his own advantage in strength and reach, but aware that one miscalculation could see her slipping under his guard, with a sting of needle's tip. The onlookers watched in rapt silence. Strikes and counters, feints and ripostes blurred together. Snow kicked up around their boots. Arya's eyes shone with a sharp, focused intensity, and John recognized that she was not only skilled, but adaptive. Each time he feigned a slash, she responded differently, as if she were testing him. When he finally tried a more direct overhead blow, she lunged to the side and lightly tapped his arm with the flat of her blade. A clear sign that, had this been a real duel, he might have been cut. He gave a nod of respect, stepping back to reset. A faint grin tugged at her lips. She was enjoying this in a measured, controlled way. No mocking, no playful jibes, just the satisfaction of a challenge met. John exhaled, his breath fogging. He turned more cautious, focusing on defensive maneuvers, trying to use his size to keep her from finding an opening. She obliged him by circling, scanning for weaknesses. The next exchange was faster. Her quick thrust tested his guard, and he caught her blade with the edge of his training sword, twisting to lock it. For a heartbeat, they stood close, blades scraping. He could see the tension in her face, the tightness around her jaw. She wrenched needle free with a jerk of her wrist and disengaged. John took a half step forward, pressing the advantage. This time, he forced her back near the edge of the ring. She parried, sparks flying from steel, and tried to pivot around him. He blocked her way, determined not to let her slip out. Her next move was unexpected. She dropped to one knee, hooking a leg behind his to unbalance him. He stumbled, just for an instant, enough to lose his sure footing on the packed snow. She sprang up, blade to his chest, though not pressing so hard as to actually wound him. He froze, feeling the cold metal through the fabric of his doublet. The small crowd exhaled in surprise. Arya and John locked gazes, panting. After a moment, she lowered needle, stepping back. John laughed softly, raising his free hand to signal the end of the bout. "You've bested me," he said, forcing warmth into his voice as he caught his breath. "I expected no less." She gave a curt nod, though her eyes held a spark of satisfaction. She turned, addressing the onlookers without fanfare. "That's enough for now." Then she wiped the blade clean on a rag offered by one of the guards. The men cast nervous glances at each other, clearly impressed and perhaps a bit unsettled by the display. Arya took her cloak back from the squire, fastening it with a swift motion. John stepped from the ring as well, returning the training sword to the rack. He could feel the lingering tension in his muscles, but also the old camaraderie that came from crossing blades with someone you trusted. When he turned back to Arya, he found her watching him with a measured expression. He spoke quietly, conscious that ears might be listening. "Thank you. I needed that. Good to remember that I can't afford to get complacent." She huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. "It was only a friendly bout. You've faced worse. As have I." They walked away from the training ground, boots crunching on the fresh dusting of snow. The men resumed their own drills, though John sensed the excitement in their ranks. They had witnessed something rare, a glimpse of Arya Stark's extraordinary skill. It would no doubt be whispered about for days. Once they were out of earshot, Arya turned to him, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Thank you for sparring with me," she said in a gentler tone than before. It's been a long time since I had a partner who wasn't afraid to meet me head-on. He tilted his head. Afraid? You think I'm not afraid of you? She looked at him closely. Maybe you are. A little. But you don't let it stop you. That's something at least. Man. John smiled, though it was tinged with ruefulness. I have a feeling I'll need that courage in the days ahead. And not only for swordplay. He paused, letting his breath settle. I must see to Lord Serwyn's steward soon, or I'll never hear the end of it from Sansa. Will you be around later? She nodded, though a flicker of guardedness passed over her features. I have a few tasks of my own, but I'll be at dinner. We can speak more then if you like. I'd like that. They parted. John watched her head toward one of the side corridors, her cloak swirling around her ankles, and then he turned toward the main courtyard to find the steward. One of the younger guards directed him to an alcove near the entrance to the granary, where the steward stood waiting. A thin, older man with stooped shoulders and a neatly trimmed beard. Your Grace, the steward said, bowing low, his breath misting. Thank you for meeting me. I hope the morning finds you well. John inclined his head. No need for formality, steward. How can I help? They said it all. The steward, evidently grateful for a direct approach, drew out a slate tablet covered in chalk scribbles. My lord, your Grace. Lord Serwyn has concerns regarding the quantity of grain allocated for the wedding feast. The winter, though mild so far, can change rapidly. We want to be certain that if we commit more stores to the celebration, we won't leave ourselves short should the next few months bring a deeper snow. John listened carefully. In truth, it was a fair concern. Winter in the north was unpredictable, and though they'd seen a relatively calm season of late, no one could guarantee it would remain so. What is your proposed solution? He asked. The steward cleared his throat. We can pledge some portion of our stored barley and wheat, but we'd ask that Winterfell supplement that with additional shipments from White Harbor or from the Manderless fleets if possible. That way, if a sudden snowfall cuts off roads, we won't be vulnerable. John considered the request. Sansa had mentioned that Lord Manderley's arrival was imminent, in part to finalize shipping routes. It made sense to coordinate. That seems reasonable, he said. We'll discuss this with Lord Manderley and confirm an arrangement that satisfies everyone. Until then, hold your current stock. Don't send anything until we have a firm commitment that it can be replaced or supplemented. The steward gave a grateful half bow. Thank you, Your Grace. Lord Serwyn will be relieved to hear it. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Might I also say, it is an honor to witness the union of House Stark and your house. The North stands behind you. Most wholeheartedly. John forced a small, polite smile. Thank you. I appreciate your loyalty, truly. He knew the man's words carried a deeper meaning. Many in the North still saw him as Ned Stark's son, no matter what Targaryen blood ran in his veins. Perhaps that was for the best, to keep the North content. We'll make sure all is prepared for a secure winter. With that, the steward departed, leaving John feeling slightly reassured that at least some of the North's more practical concerns were being addressed without conflict. He took a moment to survey the courtyard. The day had grown busier, with travelers arriving, wagons rolling in. Some bore the sigils of smaller houses sworn to the Starks. Others came with personal invitations to the wedding. He spotted a party from the west, their banners partially furled but recognizable by the depiction of a horse's head, House Riswell, if he remembered correctly. They were greeted by Winterfell guards, directed inside to warm themselves. He realized the wedding had begun to truly take shape. Houses near and far were sending their representatives. There would be feasting, dancing, diplomatic overtures, and no doubt, a fair amount of scheming in the corners of the Great Hall. John felt a flicker of dread at the thought. He had never relished courtly games. Perhaps Arya felt even more distaste for them. Still, they would endure it for the sake of unifying the North. Turning on his heel, he headed back inside, drawn by the prospect of checking in on Bran. He had not spoken with Bran since the previous day's meeting in the Solar. Bran, with his mystical abilities, might know more about who was arriving, or sense if any danger lurked. Yet whenever John tried to ask Bran for clarity, he received only cryptic remarks or mild reassurance that matters were proceeding as they should. He found his brother, cousin, though he still thought of him as brother, by the old library. Books and scrolls lay in stacks on a heavy oak table. The new maester, a middle-aged man named Maester Corin, was carefully cataloging the backlog of texts that had accrued after the previous maester's departure. Bran seemed to be guiding him, instructing which texts were northern histories, and which belonged to a more general knowledge of Westeros. Jon entered quietly. Bran raised his head, his gaze sharpening in that unsettling way. "Jon," he greeted, lifting a hand in a slight wave. "You came." Jon stepped closer, offering a polite inclination of his head to Maester Corin. "I wanted to see how the archives fared. There's been talk of reorganizing them for the wedding, to help certain visiting lords research genealogies or trade agreements and so on." Maester Corin gave a respectful bow. "Yes, Your Grace. We're in the midst of reorganizing. Lord Bran has been most helpful." He looked somewhat awed by Bran, and Jon guessed that he had heard stories of the three-eyed raven, though perhaps he didn't fully understand what Bran was. Bran turned his chair slightly, indicating a set of ancient scrolls on the table before him. "We're uncovering old Stark lineages, tracing them back to the Age of Heroes. Some visitors might find these interesting. The North has a deep history, and it won't hurt to remind them." Jon eyed the worn parchment. He recalled that once, genealogies like this might have spelled doom for him, had they revealed too much about his parentage. Now, he wore his heritage openly, at least among those who cared to know. "Good," he said simply. "Let me know if you need any resources or help." Bran offered a quiet smile. "We have it in hand, don't we, Maester?" The Maester nodded eagerly, returning to his work. Jon lingered a moment, then lowered his voice to speak just to Bran. "Has anything unusual come to your attention? Any sense of threat or trouble among the houses arriving?" Bran's expression grew distant. The faint lines on his forehead furrowed. "All gatherings of power carry their share of tensions. Some lords question your Targaryen claim, but I don't see immediate danger. The wedding will be a place for negotiations. Keep your eyes open, of course. There's always a chance that old grudges might stir." "Oh." Jon exhaled, both relieved and uneasy. "I appreciate your warning. I'll be careful." Bran nodded. "I see you and Arya have been talking more." Jon's chest tightened a fraction. He hadn't expected Bran to comment on something so personal. "We have. We're trying to find common ground, I suppose." Bran's gaze drifted across the library, lingering on the beams overhead, as though he could see beyond the walls of Winterfell, to something vast and unknown. "You have more in common than you know," he said quietly. "Your roads diverged, but they've led you here, together. Don't ignore what brought you both home." Jon felt an odd stirring in his chest. He remembered that Bran saw time differently, that he might sense possibilities or glimpses of the past and future. Sometimes it offered comfort, other times it was unsettling. He managed a nod of thanks. "I'll remember that." He left Bran to his cataloging and stepped out into the corridor, where the bustle of the day continued unabated. A messenger brushing past murmured greetings and kept going. Farther down, a pair of guards escorted a minor noble toward the great hall. The wedding's ripples were already transforming Winterfell from a somewhat secluded fortress into a bustling seat of power. He wondered if Ned Stark had ever envisioned such a scene. A Targaryen wedding in the heart of the North, presided over by his surviving children. Time slipped by in a haze of brief meetings and logistical questions. Servants approached him with concerns about decorations, about whether House Stark banners would be displayed alongside Targaryen sigils, about the seating arrangements in the hall. Jon tried to offer practical answers, but left the more elaborate decisions to Sansa Dike. She had a finer sense of how to maintain the dignity of Winterfell without overshadowing the new alliance. More and more, Jon found that each conversation circled back to the wedding. Even routine matters were couched in terms of how they might impact the ceremony. By midday, he found himself restless. He retreated to the ramparts for a few moments of fresh air. Up on the wall, the wind was sharper, cutting across the stone with an icy bite. He looked out over Winterfell's lands. Fields dotted with bare trees, a few farmsteads, the King's Road stretching south. Clouds clustered above, thick and gray, hinting at possible snowfall later. Despite the many responsibilities piling upon him, this vantage point gave him a sense of perspective. The realm looked calm here. The threat of war, a distant memory. A footstep behind him made him turn, half expecting a guard. To his mild surprise, it was Arya. She had a knack for moving quietly, appearing where she wished without fanfare. She came to stand beside him, folding her arms as she gazed out. "Sansa told me you'd be up here. She's trying to find you for yet another matter of ceremony." Jon let out a soft groan. "I'll speak with her soon enough. I just needed a moment." Arya's lips quirked in a knowing way. She looked over the battlements, where the snowy landscape stretched beneath a cold sky. After a silence, she spoke quietly. "Do you ever feel that all these people and all these plans, they're not truly ours? That we're caught up in something bigger, something we never asked for?" Jon let out a long breath, leaning against the parapet. "All the time. I felt it for years, since I first went to the wall. We do what we must, even if it's not what we want." Arya nodded, a hint of resignation in her gaze. "We'll get through it. We always do." He studied her profile, the way the wind tugged at her dark hair. She was older, so much older than the girl he remembered. Yet beneath the layers of experience, there was still that unbreakable spirit he had once known so well. "Do you think, after this wedding," he said carefully, "you might find some peace in Winterfell? Or will you grow restless again?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the horizon, as though seeing beyond the hills and forests. "Peace," she repeated softly, tasting the word. "It's not something that comes easily to me, or to you. But maybe there's a chance if we work at it. If we accept that our roles have changed." Jon nodded, though he felt a stirring of uncertainty. Would they truly find peace, or would the call of duty and the shadows of their past forever pull them elsewhere? "If you decide you want to roam again, you know I won't chain you here." She turned to him, a ghost of a smile curving her lips. "I know. But this time, if I do go, it'll be a choice we make together, not an escape in the night. Besides, there are too many people here counting on us. I can't simply vanish without a word." He reached out, very gently, and brushed a light touch against her gloved hand where it rested on the cold stone. She did not draw away, though she made no reciprocal gesture. He took comfort in the fact that she allowed the contact. "We'll face it together," he said quietly. "I'd rather face it with you than alone." She looked down at his hand, her features softening for an instant. Then she squeezed his fingers lightly, an acknowledgement of sorts, and withdrew. "We should head back before Sansa has the entire castle looking for you." He managed a wry smile. "Very well. Let's see what new complexities she's uncovered." They descended the winding steps to the courtyard, navigating past servants hauling crates of supplies. Outside the great hall, a small party of Manderley men was arriving, their cloaks trimmed in fur of sea green and white, the colors of their house. Sansa stood at the door, greeting them with her usual composed grace. When she spotted Jon and Arya, relief tempered her polite smile. "Perfect timing," she said as they approached. "Lord Manderley has arrived. He's in the hall, waiting to speak with you both. Though primarily you, Jon. Something about finalizing shipments and coordinating the feast with the Serwans." "Now," Arya inclined her head, "I'll leave the negotiations to you. I have little to add on such matters." Lord Manderley, a broad man with a kindly face and a great bristling mustache, had begun moving toward them from just inside. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Jon with a respectful but warm tone, "and Lady Arya, an honor to see you again." His gaze flicked between them, curiosity evident. "I trust preparations for the grand event are going well?" Jon nodded, gesturing for the man to step further inside, out of the biting cold. Sansa ushered them into a side chamber where a simple wooden table stood, set with fresh candles. Arya lingered by the door, making it clear she had no intention of sitting in on a lengthy negotiation, unless absolutely necessary. Lord Manderley got straight to the point. We have several ships currently harbored at White Harbor, laden with grain, fish, and some casks of wine from the arbor. Expensive stuff, might I add. If we're to bring these stores to Winterfell, we need to ensure the roads are clear. Wagons can make the trip, but it might require multiple journeys unless we can coordinate more drivers. I'd also like to know where we'll store the goods. I've been told the main storerooms are near capacity. Nah. Jon listened carefully, resisting the urge to glance at Arya. She was standing with her arms crossed, looking mildly disinterested but also watchful. He turned his attention to Manderley. We can repurpose a few of the older storerooms near the southern tower. It's not ideal, but we can make space for perishables and keep the rest in the granary. As for drivers, I'll have the stewards gather as many as we can spare. If the roads become impassable, we'll need a backup plan. Maybe keep some goods in Castle Serwyn, then bring them up in smaller caravans once conditions improve. Davison Malor. Lord Manderley beamed. Excellent. I see the king in the north, if I may call you that, still has a head for practicalities. This wedding is going to be quite an affair from what I hear. Jon managed a tight smile. He disliked the reference to royalty, still feeling the sting of how many times the crown had weighed heavily on him. Yet he let it pass. We aim to ensure it's an occasion worthy of the north, and that all houses feel welcome. Manderley's gaze turned momentarily to Arya. And you, Lady Arya? Would you be needing anything special for the ceremony? Arya, startled out of her silent watch, raised her chin slightly. No, I'm content with what we have here. Thank you for asking. Very well, Manderley said, his mustache curling with a smile. Then we'll finalize these arrangements in writing later today, if that pleases you. Jon inclined his head. It does. We appreciate your aid, Lord Manderley. With that, the short meeting concluded, and Manderley departed to speak with the stewards about detailed inventories. Jon let out a small sigh of relief once they were gone. Sansa gave him a nod, lips quirking in satisfaction. That went more smoothly than I expected. Now we only need to sort out a half-dozen other matters. Arya cleared her throat. I think I've had enough wedding talk for the moment. Sansa held up a hand. Wait, there's something you should know. We've received word that a small delegation from the Vale might arrive earlier than planned. They heard about the wedding and decided to come. Arya's eyes flicked toward Jon. Which houses? Sansa crossed to a table where a fresh letter lay. House Royce, primarily. Perhaps a few knights from House Corbray. They're apparently keen to pay their respects. I suspect they also wish to see if any alliances can be made. She looked at Jon then, her expression thoughtful. The Vale is loyal to the Starks, but they're not entirely comfortable with the notion of a Targaryen presence in the north. You'll have to be at your most diplomatic, Jon. Arya let out a quiet scoff. Diplomacy isn't exactly his best trait, nor mine. Sansa's tone remained composed. You did fine with Manderley. We can handle Royce in a similar manner. Be straightforward, show respect, but hold firm to our position. She cast a glance between them. And perhaps you two could appear together when they arrive. Present a united front. Let them see that House Stark and House Targaryen stand as one. Meriosi. Jon felt a twinge of discomfort at being used as a display, but he knew Sansa was right. We can manage that, he said, looking to Arya for confirmation. She gave a slight nod, though her jaw tightened. He added, when are they due? Likely in 3 or 4 days. The roads are slow, but they've been traveling steadily. Arya shrugged. Then we have time to prepare. Fine. I'll speak with you both again tomorrow. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get some air before the day grows too crowded. Nanny Dansey. Without further conversation, she slipped away, leaving Jon and Sansa alone in the chamber. Sansa gave him a knowing look. She's trying, she said. I can see that. Let her be for now. Jon nodded. I will. But what about you? You're working too hard. She allowed a small laugh. I'll rest when it's done. Besides, the wedding is as much my concern as yours. House Stark must present strength and unity. I won't fail Father's memory. Her words stirred an old ache within Jon. He thought of Ned Stark, of the quiet honor that had defined the man. "Neither will I," he said softly. "We'll carry it forward together." Sansa reached out and gently squeezed his hand, a rare gesture of affection between them. "Then let's see to the rest of the day's affairs. The realm won't wait." Together, they left the chamber, heading into the labyrinth of corridors that led toward the next set of duties. Jon felt a familiar weariness settle over him, a mixture of obligations, politics, and the personal tensions that wove between them. Yet, underneath it all, he recognized a glimmer of resolve. He and Arya, though neither had chosen this path in a conventional sense, were determined to see it through on terms that kept House Stark strong and the North unified. If that meant countless meetings, forced diplomacy, and the weight of expectant eyes, then so be it. The afternoon slipped into a stream of small negotiations and visits from lesser houses. Scribes scurried back and forth, carrying documents to be reviewed, sealed, and returned. Jon found himself repeating the same information about wedding preparations. Yes, the ceremony would be held under the old gods, though a septon might offer a blessing for southern lords who wished it. Yes, the great hall would be adorned in the colors of both houses. Yes, the entire realm was invited to witness, so long as they came in peace. His throat grew dry from endless polite discussions, and by late afternoon, he longed for the solitude of the ramparts once more. Eventually, he managed a short break, ducking into a quiet alcove where a window overlooked the godswood. The yard was empty at this hour, the heart tree's red leaves stirring in a faint breeze. Snow lay in a neat blanket around the tree's roots, and the carved face seemed to stare up at the sky, unconcerned with mortal troubles. Jon took a moment to breathe, resting his forehead against the cool stone of the window frame. He wondered where Arya was now. Perhaps she found a quiet place of her own, or maybe she was walking along the old walls, or practicing her forms in the solitude of the godswood. He thought of their sparring match that morning, how she had bested him with skill and cunning. A flicker of pride warmed him. If nothing else, the realm would gain a queen. If she would accept the title, who knew how to defend herself and command respect? That alone might set tongues wagging. Night fell slowly, as northern nights often did, the sky darkening in gradual shades of gray and purple before the first stars emerged. The castle lamps were lit, sending orange glows across walls and courtyards. Servants bustled about, lighting candles and torches in the great hall, preparing for the evening meal. Jon let himself be drawn into the hall once again, taking his seat at the high table. This time, it was busier. Several newly arrived lords and knights took up positions near the front, eager for the warmth of the fire and the promise of meat and ale. At length, Arya appeared, slipping in from the side. She wore a simple gray tunic under a fur-lined cloak, her hair braided. She took the seat beside Jon, drawing a few stairs. He caught a faint whiff of cold air clinging to her cloak, as though she had been outside until just moments ago. Lords and ladies offered polite greetings, to which she responded with curt nods. The meal began: roast venison and boiled potatoes, bread warm from the ovens, and a hearty stew. Wine was poured, though Arya took only a little, favoring water. Jon noticed how she kept her gaze alert, moving from face to face. It was as if she was still that wolf girl from years past, scanning the crowd for threats. He leaned close enough for her to hear over the din. "Is everything all right?" She dipped her head in a small gesture of acknowledgement. "Fine. I just don't like crowds, but I'll endure." He understood. Feasts and gatherings had never truly been her domain. "If you need some air, feel free," he said softly. "No one can force you to stay." She gave him a sideways look that might have held gratitude. "I'll manage a little while longer. I know how important it is for everyone to see us together." He felt a twinge of regret at how much of this wedding had become a performance. Yet he also knew, for the sake of the North's stability, that performance had value. They talked sparingly during the meal, though they exchanged the occasional small remark about a rude joke from one of the lords, or the boisterous laughter from the far tables. The crowd seemed more at ease tonight, spurred by the arrival of new guests and the promise of more festivities to come. Tankards were refilled, and the music of a single lute drifted around the hall. Eventually, Sansa rose, offering a toast to welcome Lord Manderley and the other visiting lords. She spoke in that clear, calm voice that commanded respect. praising their journey and expressing hope that the wedding would bring renewed bonds of friendship among all houses. The onlookers cheered, lifting their cups. John and Arya both raised theirs as well, albeit with more subdued enthusiasm. After the toast, the evening wore on with casual conversation and slowly emptying plates. Many lords took the opportunity to congratulate John and Arya personally, though they stumbled over how to address them. Some called Arya "my lady," others ventured "future queen," uncertain of which was correct. Arya merely nodded, neither confirming nor refuting the titles. When enough time had passed to satisfy appearances, Arya quietly excused herself. John noted the subtle set of her shoulders, the way tension gathered in the line of her jaw. She had done her part, shown a public face. Now she craved the shadows and quiet corners where she felt most at home. He watched her go, feeling a mixture of admiration and concern. He remained a little longer, listening to the boisterous chatter of the men who had fought in the war, and now spoke of it as though it were a distant memory. Occasionally they glanced at John with respect or awe, but he felt no pride in the recollection of those dark battles. Eventually, he too slipped away, heading for the quiet of his chamber. Ghost awaited him inside, lifting his head from the rug near the fire. John approached the direwolf and sank to a knee, running a hand through Ghost's thick fur. The wolf blinked at him with those red eyes, silent and watchful. John thought of how many times Ghost had been by his side, through betrayal at the wall, through the war against the Night King. Now they were in a new kind of conflict, a political one, a matter of alliances and vows. No less dangerous, he supposed, just different. He removed his cloak and boots, easing into a chair by the hearth. The flames cast dancing shadows, illuminating the small table where a pitcher of water and a cup waited. He poured himself a drink, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. Outside, the wind moaned against the castle walls, suggesting snow might be gathering in the dark. His thoughts drifted to Arya once more. He imagined her in some remote corridor, or perhaps the gods would, letting the hush of the old trees calm her mind. She had changed, no doubt, but so had he, and yet the bond they shared refused to vanish, lingering beneath the surface like a stubborn root that refused to wither. They were bound by the memory of who they once were, and now they were bound again by the promise of uniting houses for the sake of the North. He stared at the flickering flames, the day's events swirling in his mind. The wedding, the guests arriving, the negotiations, each an aspect of a single tapestry they were weaving. A tapestry in which he and Arya stood at the center, both of them uncertain about what form it would ultimately take. On one hand, their union was political, a matter of duty. On the other, it was personal, bound up in the complexities of their shared past and their individual transformations. Perhaps no one else in the realm truly understood that. Perhaps no one else needed to. He touched the spot on his chest where Arya had held Needle during their sparring match. He could still recall the cold press of steel, the fierce light in her eyes. In some ways, that moment captured the essence of who they both were. Two warriors, shaped by hardship, each willing to stand their ground. If they could learn to stand together, maybe they could create something lasting in a world prone to chaos. His eyelids grew heavy as the warmth of the fire lulled him. Tomorrow would bring more demands, visitors to greet, additional plans to finalize, old alliances to reaffirm and new ones to forge. Yet for now, he allowed himself to drift, letting the crackle of the fire and the presence of Ghost be his only companions. The tension in his shoulders eased a fraction, giving way to an unspoken understanding that he need not solve everything in a single day. In the stillness of that late hour, he allowed himself a small flicker of hope. The wedding approached, carrying the weight of many expectations. But behind all the formality was a promise made between two individuals who had walked the darkest roads and come out the other side. If they could endure the politics and the scrutiny, they might discover something genuine, a sense of belonging, a unity that transcended alliances of convenience. Perhaps they would even find peace. It was a fragile hope, like a spark in a winter storm. Yet he held on to it as he let the fire's glow guide him into an uneasy, dreaming sleep. Nah. Hanishintabche. A pale gray dawn crept into Winterfell, softening the edges of the castle's formidable stone walls. The wind, sharper this morning than the day before, whistled through the old battlements and ruffled the coats of guards on the ramparts. Most of the guests still slept after the previous evening's feast, though a few early risers, stable hands, cooks, and some restless knights were already stirring. The sky held a promise of impending snow, its clouds thick and low. Jon awoke with a start in his chamber, the embers in the hearth glowing faintly red. Ghost curled at his feet. For a moment he couldn't tell whether he had slept deeply or barely dozed. Dreams had come and gone in a blur of half-remembered images. Arya, the godswood, the swirl of cloaks and distant war horns. He brushed off the remnants of uneasy sleep, rubbing his face as he rose from the chair. He moved gingerly, his muscles tight from yesterday's spar. Leaning down, he patted Ghost's flank, receiving a silent yawn and a flick of the direwolf's ears in return. He dressed quickly in layered clothing, fastening a warm cloak at his shoulders and a sword belt around his waist. Even before stepping into the corridor, he could sense the busy hum of the castle. It was as if Winterfell itself was bracing for another day of arrivals and preparations. The hush of earlier days had given way to the constant drone of travelers, of voices in countless accents, of staff rushing about with urgent tasks. Jon walked with purpose, nodding to each guard he passed, but avoided any conversation until he reached the great hall. A few servants were there, cleaning up after a modest breakfast spread. There was no grand feast this morning. Sansa had requested something simple to keep the kitchens from being overwhelmed. The wedding was still weeks away, but the number of guests would continue to grow, and food needed to be managed carefully. Jon selected some bread, cold meat, and a cup of spiced cider, leaning against the long table as he ate. His gaze wandered to the head of the hall, where high-backed chairs stood. In days past, he might have joined the feast as Ned Stark's bastard, unnoticed and unremarkable. Now he was a Targaryen, soon to wed a Stark daughter, and the entire realm seemed intent on scrutinizing his every move. Footsteps broke his reverie. Sansa entered, wearing a thick burgundy gown and cloak. Her hair was pinned up in a simple style, and the shadows beneath her eyes spoke of little sleep. Yet her posture was straight and resolute. She walked to him, offering a subdued smile. "Good morning," she said. "I thought I might find you here. You wake before half the castle, though it seems you beat even me today." He nodded, sipping the cider. "I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about everything that needs to be done." A wry quirk of her lips suggested she shared that feeling. "The day is full," she said. "I've already been told House Dustin's party nears our gates. And not long after that, the Glovers will bring some of their kin. Soon, we'll have quite the crowd in the courtyard, all expecting a proper welcome." Jon set his cup down, brow furrowing. "Will you handle the formalities? Or shall we greet them together?" She considered. "Perhaps we should do it together. Arya might join us too, but I won't force her. She did well last night, putting on a public face, but I don't want to exhaust her. If she's willing, all the better." He agreed, finishing off the bread. "Right. I'll make sure to be there. Where shall we meet them?" "The courtyard near the main gates. We can give them a traditional northern welcome. Some hot cider or mulled wine, a few words of greeting, and stable their horses in the new stalls. After that, I imagine they'll want to refresh themselves before we talk wedding details. We'll keep it brief." A slight tension left Jon's shoulders. He wasn't fond of endless ceremonies, but a warm welcome was the northern way. "Agreed. Let's do it." Sansa gave a nod, resting her hand on his arm for a moment. "Thank you. I know it's draining, but the more houses we gather peacefully, the better for the north." They walked together out of the hall, weaving through corridors busy with staff. Outside, the courtyard lay under a veil of cold, brittle light. Guards lined the walls, cloaks pulled tight to ward off the chill. Servants dashed across the yard, carrying crates or sacks of supplies. Stable boys trotted back and forth, preparing for the arrival of more horses. Jon and Sansa found a spot by the castle gates, standing on a patch of well-trodden snow. One of the guards offered them each a pair of fur-lined gloves, which they donned gratefully. Not long after, a shout went up on the walls. Riders approached. Jon felt the old tension coil in his belly, perhaps a memory from days of war, when any arrival could spell danger. But these were allies, or so they claimed. House Dustin's banners soon became visible, their sigil a pair of crossed long axes on a field of russet and gold. They were a proud house, with a long history of distrust toward Targaryenians and Southerners. Jon recalled hearing rumors that Lady Dustin, who once held the seat, had no love for Ned Stark either. But times had changed, and if they were arriving for the wedding, that meant they sought alliances instead of grievances. The lead rider, an older lord with iron-gray hair, bound at the nape, dismounted with a grunt. He wore a thick cloak in House Dustin's colors, and had a pinched, weathered face that suggested he was no stranger to northern winters. After him, a group of riders and a smaller carriage halted in the outer courtyard, steam rising from the horses' nostrils. Sansa stepped forward with a polite, measured smile. "Welcome to Winterfell," she said, raising her voice to be heard above the shuffle of hooves and men dismounting. "We are glad you've come to join us." The older lord bowed stiffly. "Lord Allard Dustin," he introduced himself. "We thank you for your hospitality, Lady Stark, and your grace." His eyes shifted to Jon, and the greeting held a hint of reservation. Still, it was not overtly hostile. Jon inclined his head. "Winterfell is honored to have you. Our men will see to your horses. Hot drinks await you inside." Lord Dustin grunted in acceptance. Behind him, more riders dismounted, a younger man and two middle-aged knights, who exchanged glances, sizing up the new arrivals in the courtyard. While the stable hands approached to lead the horses away, a cluster of Winterfell's own guards escorted the Dustin party inside. Sansa guided them graciously, offering words about the warm hearths and the feast that would come later. Jon followed, occasionally meeting the uncertain looks of the Dustin men, with the politeness that diplomacy demanded. They led the group to one of the antechambers near the great hall, where a fire crackled, and a long table held pitchers of spiced wine and cider. Servants poured steaming cups, and the newcomers soon huddled close to the hearth, rubbing hands or blowing on them for warmth. Jon and Sansa exchanged a quick, subtle look. So far, so good. Arya entered then, slipping in from a side corridor. She wore a simple dark tunic under her fur-lined cloak, her expression reserved. A fresh sheen of cold air clung to her, suggesting she'd been out walking. She nodded to Jon, then addressed the Dustins with a courteous tilt of her head. "Welcome to Winterfell," she said in a cool, clear voice. "We trust your journey was safe." One of the younger knights, evidently unaccustomed to seeing the Stark lady armed so openly, blinked at the sight of needle at her hip. He coughed, then replied, "Safe enough, my lady. The roads are passable, if a bit icy." Arya's gaze flicked over him, and she said nothing more. Jon suppressed a smile at the mild awkwardness in the air. Arya had that effect on those who expected a more demure presence. Still, no one dared challenge her right to carry a blade. They knew the stories. Sansa took charge then, instructing the steward to show the Dustin party to their rooms, so they could rest. Lord Allard mumbled his thanks, departing with his men in tow. The antechamber quieted, and for a moment, Jon, Sansa, and Arya were left among servants clearing cups. Sansa exhaled. That's one house settled. The Glovers should arrive in the next few hours if the reports are correct. Arya ran a gloved hand over the back of a wooden chair. "I'll let you handle that if you don't mind. I might be more useful checking on the new guards near the armory. One of them was injured last night. Sprained ankle, I believe, but I want to be sure our watch isn't compromised." "Dumbly." Sansa nodded, accustomed to Arya's vigilance. "Yes, of course." Arya glanced at Jon, her eyes sharp. "Will you be busy with more greetings?" He nodded, removing his gloves now that they stood near the fire. "Likely. The day's only begun. I'll join Sansa in welcoming the Glovers. That should be enough polite conversation for me in one day." Arya gave a slight grin. "We'll meet at supper then. Good luck with the pleasantries." "Verstein." Jon watched her leave, a swirl of her cloak trailing behind. She moved with that stealthy grace that always turned heads. Once she was gone, he turned back to Sansa, noticing a flicker of amusement in her eyes. She's growing more comfortable, Sansa observed. Slowly, but I can see it. At least she's not avoiding everyone entirely. Jon mused on that. She's doing what she can. Sometimes she seems almost at ease here, and other times she looks ready to vanish. Sansa's face softened. Winterfell was never going to be simple for her, not after all she's been through. But I'm glad she's here. We need her. She paused. I need both of you. Sometimes, I miss the days when it was just us, in simpler times. Jon understood the pang in her voice. Those old memories often returned, especially when the castle halls were crowded with strangers. But the past was gone. They had a future to build, or so he reminded himself. Let's go, he said quietly. We have more arrivals to greet. They left the antechamber and made their way to the ramparts overlooking the gates once more, waiting for word from the watch. Snow began to drift down, light flakes swirling in the breeze. Sansa pulled her cloak tighter, glancing toward the sky with concern. If this keeps up, travel might become slower. That could delay some guests, or possibly strand them here longer than intended. Jon frowned. Better they arrive late than not at all. But yes, we should prepare for a larger crowd if they can't leave. Nee. She nodded, then turned her attention to a guard who was calling from the gate. Another party approached, bearing a sigil that looked like the mailed fist of House Glover. The routine repeated, dismounting, introductions, and warm welcomes. Yet it wasn't entirely mechanical. Each house came with its own atmosphere. Some were eager, some wary, some curious about the wedding. All had questions, and all carried subtle agendas. Jon braced himself for hours of measured conversation. By midday, the courtyard buzzed with activity. Winterfell's normally spacious grounds felt crowded by extra horses, carriages, and wagons. Grooms rushed about, ensuring the newcomers had places to store their traveling gear. Servants offered cups of mulled wine, while a few lesser nobles and knights tried to mingle, eager to glean information about the wedding or the state of the North's alliances. Jon eventually excused himself to find a moment's peace, leaving Sansa conversing with the head of House Glover. He retreated toward the castle's side passages, weaving through narrow corridors seldom used by guests. The walls here were cool and slightly damp, with torches spaced widely enough that some stretches lay in shadow. He wanted to clear his head before the next round of pleasantries drained him entirely. He turned a corner and nearly collided with Arya, who moved with silent steps, her expression focused. She stopped short, surprise flickering in her eyes, then quickly relaxed when she saw it was him. "You're in a hurry," Jon observed quietly, stepping aside to let her pass. "I was coming to see if you needed anything," she replied. "I heard we have a half-dozen lords wandering about, waiting for a chance to speak with you or Sansa. Thought you might need rescuing." He let out a weary breath. "If you want to rescue me from a day of feigned politeness, I wouldn't object." A smile curved his lips. "But Sansa's handling the bulk of it. She's far better at these matters." Arya nodded, her expression somewhere between sympathetic and amused. "You've become better at it than you think, Jon, even if you hate every minute. Where are you heading now?" He glanced behind him, then shrugged. "Nowhere in particular. Just needed a break from the crowd." Her lips pressed together in thought. After a moment, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then let's find a place to talk, away from these halls." Jon raised an eyebrow, curiosity stirring in him. "Lead the way." She guided him down 2 more corridors and up a short flight of winding stairs that eventually opened onto a smaller courtyard, little used in recent days. An overhang sheltered one side of it, and straw lay scattered where a few older training dummies stood abandoned. The space was quiet, cut off from the main yard by a thick wall. Snow drifted here too, forming gentle mounds in corners. Jon realized it was the courtyard where they used to train as children. He glanced at Arya, and she answered his unspoken question with a small nostalgic tilt of her head. "No one comes here much anymore," she said. "It's mostly used for storing old targets and broken practice blades. I thought we could have a moment's peace." She moved to a bench against the wall, brushing snow off it before sitting. Jon joined her, drawing his cloak around him. A hush enveloped the courtyard, broken only by the faint rustle of wind and the distant echoes of voices from the main yard. Arya studied the old straw targets, half collapsed and forlorn. When I was a girl, I used to sneak out here with a bow. Do you remember? Sometimes you caught me. You showed me how to correct my stance. We had to hide from the master-at-arms so he wouldn't scold us for letting me practice. John nodded, recalling those secret lessons with a twinge of longing. I remember. You were stubborn, always wanted to prove you could shoot better than Bran or Robb. Her face softened, shaped by memory. I was so proud the first time I hit the bullseye. I wanted to run to Father and show him, but, well, that was a different time. He felt the old ache for Ned Stark. He would have been proud of you, Arya, truly. He saw more than you knew. She nodded once, eyes clouded with thoughts too deep to name. For a moment, neither spoke. The courtyard silence felt oddly comforting. They were alone, away from the watchful eyes of lords and stewards, permitted a rare moment of honesty. Arya's voice, when it came, was soft but resolute. So many people are descending on Winterfell for this wedding. It's like a net closing in. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe among them. Jon turned to face her. I feel it too. I keep telling myself it's for the good of the North, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Her gaze flicked to him, searching. And after the wedding? Will it be any simpler? Or will we always have a stream of visitors expecting feasts and negotiations? Nah. He hesitated. Some of it will continue, but perhaps once the vows are made and the alliance is sealed, the lords will disperse to their own lands. The realm is at peace, or the closest to peace it's known in a long time. People will want to return home eventually. Arya's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Good. I don't want Winterfell to turn into another King's Landing, always filled with schemers. She tapped a gloved hand on her thigh, restless energy evident. I'm not like Sansa. I can't sit at a high table and exchange polite jibes all day. I'd rather be out there in the forest or on the roads. No, Jon offered a half smile. There's no reason our marriage should chain you here forever. We can find a balance if that's what you want. Travel is dangerous, but we've both faced danger before. Her eyes flashed with something like relief. Thank you. I needed to hear that. She caught herself, inhaling deeply, as though steadying her thoughts. I agreed to this wedding because I trust you, Jon. But I won't pretend I'm suddenly a lady who's content to oversee sewing circles and feasts. He reached for her hand, resting his own lightly atop it. She tensed only for a moment, then allowed the contact. I don't expect you to change, he said. I wouldn't want that. If anything, the North needs someone like you. A Stark who's not afraid to do what's necessary. She studied their hands, gloved fingers barely touching. Snow dusted her hair where it had escaped from her hood. Slowly, she nodded. Sometimes I think how strange this is, us, bound by a vow we never imagined. But I also think it could be worse. At least I know you won't betray me or try to force me into a cage of silk dresses and southern courtesies. Nessun. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, then released it, acutely aware of how the gesture felt at once familiar and unprecedented. You're free, Arya. This marriage is for the realm, but it's also ours to shape. No one else can decide what it means to us. She turned her face away for a heartbeat, as if the intimacy of the moment was too much. We'd better head back soon, she said, rising from the bench, boots crunching on the thin crust of snow. Sansa will notice our absence, and the lords will start whispering about it. Jon rose as well, stifling a sigh of resignation. You're right. This was a good idea, though, coming here. Thank you. She mustered a small smile, though her eyes flickered with unspoken emotion. Without another word, she led him back through the winding corridors, the hush of the old courtyard left behind like a fleeting dream. By the time they returned to the main hallways, the bustle of Winterfell had risen to a steady roar. The sense of suffocation pressed in again, but Jon carried with him the memory of that quiet space, the old straw targets, and Arya's honest words. It lent him a measure of resolve as he re-entered the fray. Sure enough, a messenger found him almost immediately, explaining that Lord Royce of the Vale had arrived earlier than expected. He and his retinue were settling in, but Lord Royce requested a brief audience to discuss important matters regarding the wedding. John exchanged a glance with Arya. She gave a slight shake of her head, clearly uninterested in more politics, and slipped away. He felt a pang of envy at her ability to vanish, but he composed himself and followed the messenger. Lord Royce awaited him in one of the castle's receiving rooms, a high-ceilinged chamber lit by tall windows. Royce stood near the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. He was a solidly built man, older, wearing a breastplate over fine clothes. His sigil, the bronze falcon of House Royce, gleamed in the firelight. When John entered, Royce bowed in a measured but respectful manner. "Your Grace," he said, "forgive the sudden arrival. The roads proved less treacherous than we anticipated." "Enter." John inclined his head. "No forgiveness needed. Winterfell is open to you and your men. I trust your journey was smooth." "As smooth as can be expected in winter," Royce replied. "My men and I are grateful for the warmth of your hearth. We come not just to witness the wedding but to renew ties between the Vale and the North. The Lady of the Vale sends her regards. She hopes this union will signal a stable future for all our great houses." John recognized the political undertones. The Vale had been a wavering ally at times. It was strong enough to stand alone if it wished, yet it had often answered the call of House Stark. Now they were testing the waters with this new Targaryen twist. "We share that hope," John said steadily. "I assure you, this wedding is meant to unite the North and all who stand with us." Royce studied him for a moment. "Indeed. I recall that House Stark once declared itself independent of the Iron Throne. Now there's talk of a Targaryen leading the North. It has caused some confusion. Do you style yourself king in the North still, or king of the Seven Kingdoms? Some in the Vale wonder where your loyalty lies." "Nay." John quelled a flicker of impatience. "My loyalty is to the North and to peace. The realm has seen enough war. After the fall of the previous queen, I sought to keep the North safe, not to place it under an iron rule. We remain the guardians of our own lands, but if the Southern Lords accept me as a Targaryen, so be it. I won't force them, nor do I seek the Iron Throne. That was never my goal." Royce nodded, perhaps reassured. "Then I see. The Lady of the Vale will be pleased to know that this is about stability, not conquest." "Now," John allowed a faint smile, "I'm sure Lady Arya would say the same. Our marriage is a northern matter first and foremost, but we welcome the Vale's friendship." Royce's eyes glinted with mild approval. "Then let us raise a toast to that soon. For now, I'll leave you to your many tasks. If you have need of my sword or counsel, I'm at your service." He bowed once more, then departed with the measured steps of a man well used to courtly life. Left alone, John exhaled. The day was wearing on, and he found himself longing for a moment like the one in the old courtyard. But there was no time. He needed to check on the newly arrived parties and speak with Sansa. His footsteps echoed in the receiving room as he headed out, noticing how the shadows lengthened. The cloud cover had thickened, and the windows admitted only a dim, snow-filtered light. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a blur of small conversations. An envoy from White Harbor needed to confirm shipping details for more supplies. A group of lesser knights required direction on where to house their squires. The steward from House Serwyn wanted final word on the schedule for the wedding ceremonies. It felt endless, and by the time evening settled over Winterfell, John's patience had thinned to a fine thread. The great hall, however, seemed more alive than ever. Tables were laden with hearty stews, bread, roasted game, and pitchers of ale and wine. The newly arrived lords and knights filled the benches in clusters, talking and laughing over the drone of harp music. Torches and braziers lined the walls, creating a glow that warded off the gloom of the snowy night. John arrived to find the hall nearly full. A hush spread in his wake, many pausing to acknowledge him with a bow or raise of a cup. He made polite greetings, searching for Arya or Sansa. Sansa was at the high table, conversing with Lord Manderley and a Glover bannerman. She gestured for John to join them. He wove through the tables, nodding greetings, occasionally shaking hands. At last he slipped into a seat beside her. She leaned over, speaking in a low murmur. Everything's under control, at least for now. The hall is quite crowded, but that was inevitable. Are you all right? He gave a small nod, though he felt drained. I'm fine, just tired. His gaze flicked over the crowd. Where's Arya? Sansa glanced around. She was here earlier. Spoke a bit with the Dustons, then left. She said she'd return after checking on the guard rotations. Typical Arya. Sansa smiled softly, adding, I think she prefers to slip in and out as she pleases, especially with so many people about. Jon hid a small grin. That sounds like her. He turned to greet Lord Manderley, who smiled through his great mustache and offered a jovial toast to House Stark and Targaryen. Jon lifted his cup, forcing a polite smile. Around them, conversation buzzed, and the warmth of the hall became oppressive. He tried to eat, but every few moments someone approached, seeking to exchange pleasantries or express their excitement for the wedding. Invariably, these well-wishers also asked subtle questions. Would the bride wear the direwolf and dragon sigils together? Would they say vows before the heart tree or the seven? Jon answered as best he could, repeating the same refrain. An exchange of cloaks in the gods would, per northern tradition, but with a septon's presence for the visiting southerners. The questions felt endless. Sometime into the meal, a minor scuffle drew attention near the far end of the hall. A pair of young knights jostling, perhaps fueled by too much wine. Guards stepped in swiftly, and the commotion subsided. Jon exchanged a knowing look with Sansa. These gatherings often tested the patience of men who, after long days on the road, found themselves indulging in strong drink. She stood, excusing herself to ensure order was maintained, leaving Jon momentarily alone at the high table. He gazed over the flickering torches, the press of bodies, the swirl of chatter that rose like a cloud of bees. A part of him yearned to be outside, breathing cold air. Yet he stayed, conscious of the eyes upon him. Slowly, he finished a portion of stew and some roasted turnips, washing it down with watered wine to keep a clear head. The hall brimmed with lords, their retinues, and local small folk who had gained entry to see the spectacle. Musicians strolled between tables, plucking strings or piping tunes that mingled into a tapestry of sound. When Arya finally appeared again, she did so quietly. Jon noticed her entering from a side arch, stepping into the edge of torchlight. She surveyed the scene, took in the swirl of the crowd, and made a subtle line for the high table. He watched her approach, admiring the confidence in her stride. Even among so many people, she carried an air that discouraged intrusion. She slipped onto the bench beside him, drawing little attention save for a few curious glances. "Did I miss anything interesting?" she asked softly, eyeing the crowd as she reached for a loaf of bread. He tilted his head. A small near brawl in the corner. Some toasts, too many questions. His mouth quirked with ironic amusement. The usual. She tore off a piece of bread, nibbling it thoughtfully. "Sansa sorting out the scuffle, I assume?" "Most likely. She vanished in that direction a moment ago." He studied Arya's face. She looked calm but tired around the eyes. "Did you find what you needed outside the hall?" "I did," she said quietly, her voice lost to others in the roar of conversation. "I watched the shift change in the courtyard, made sure the new guards knew their routes. It's surprisingly easy for some of these lords to wander off in the night, looking for trouble or amusements." Jon nodded. "Thank you. I hadn't even thought of that." A faint smile touched her lips. "That's why you have me. I notice these things." They lapsed into a companionable silence. Arya ate a bit more, ignoring the extravagance of the feast in favor of simpler fare. Jon sipped from his cup, letting the warmth of the hall seep into his bones, though it was nearly overwhelming at this point. Lord Manderley, spotting Arya, leaned over to offer a jovial greeting. She answered politely enough, then turned back to Jon. "This wedding," she murmured, "still doesn't feel real. Sometimes I catch myself thinking we have months or years, but it's looming, and every day more people arrive." "They know?" He nodded, remembering her earlier words about feeling trapped. "Perhaps we can slip away again tomorrow, for a brief respite in the godswood or the old courtyard, just to breathe. She considered. I'd like that. Then, noticing Sansa's approach, Arya fell silent, shifting back into the guarded composure she adopted around others. Sansa returned with a polite smile, though Jon could see tension in her brow. She sat, smoothing her skirts, and whispered, "The matter is settled. Just a case of too much wine and bruised pride. No one seriously hurt." Then she cast a glance at Arya. "Glad you're here, sister. Perhaps we can show the lords that the Starks stand together, politely, at least for a while." Arya arched an eyebrow but said nothing. Jon recognized Sansa's subtle attempt at unity. So they remained at the high table, the three of them, with occasional conversations passing by in waves. The evening stretched out, and though the chatter grew louder, a few visitors began drifting off to their quarters. The older lords retired early, citing the weariness of travel. Younger knights lingered, half-heartedly challenging each other to contests of drinking or dice. At length, Jon felt the press of the day's exhaustion. The firelight made his eyes ache, and the thick air in the hall weighed on him. Sansa was still engaged in quiet talk with House Serene Steward, so he inclined his head and excused himself. Arya rose too, following him out of the great hall and into the corridor. The hush that greeted them felt like stepping into another world. Muffled laughter and the music of a lone lute carried faintly through the thick walls. She walked beside him down the passage. "I'd offer to see you to your chamber," she said with wry humor. "But I suspect you can find a way by yourself." Jon almost laughed. "I've spent enough time lost in these halls as a boy. Not anymore." Her lips curved at the corners, a hint of memory shared. They reached a branching corridor, lamplit and empty. Soft torchlight flickered against the stones. Arya paused, turning to face him, her cloak trailing on the flagstones. "Are you holding up all right?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than mere politeness. He let out a slow breath. "I am. It's just a lot. I keep telling myself it's necessary that all these lords gathered here means the North stands strong. But sometimes it feels like an avalanche of demands." She nodded, fiddling with the edge of her cloak. "We'll endure it. You always do." The warmth of her words nudged a chord in him, an echo of the trust they once shared unconditionally. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Thank you for being here. I know you'd rather be out, and instead you're stepping into a role no one expected." "B." She searched his face, her gray eyes steady. "You're stepping into it too. We'll do it together." He could think of nothing to say, so he simply nodded. They lingered another heartbeat in the torchlit corridor, the sounds of the feast distant and muted. Then she exhaled, as though releasing a tension coiled inside her, and turned away. "Good night, Jon," she said over her shoulder. "I'll see you in the morning." He watched her walk off, footsteps quiet. A swirl of conflicting emotions passed through him. Admiration, relief, longing, inside. The sense of belonging she evoked battled with the heavy awareness that all eyes in the realm rested on them. He inhaled, steadying himself, then made his own way to his chamber. Ghost was waiting inside, rising from the hearthrug with a soft huff of greeting. Jon smiled, closing the door behind him. He shrugged off his cloak and boots, then knelt to scratch the direwolf's ears. "Long day, Ghost," he murmured. The wolf regarded him with vivid red eyes, tail swishing. Jon sank into a chair, letting out a tired groan as he leaned back. Outside, snow flurried against the shuttered windows, tapping like small, insistent fingers. He replayed the day's events in his mind, the arrivals, the forced smiles, the negotiations. Arya's calm presence in the deserted courtyard lingered in his thoughts like a balm. It reminded him that no matter how entangled they became in politics, there was a truth beneath it that neither could ignore. They had a bond, forged in childhood and tested by war, that didn't fit the standard rules of houses and alliances. He rose, stoked the fire a bit higher, and changed into more comfortable clothing. The bed beckoned. As he sank onto the mattress, Ghost circled and settled near the foot, watchful even in rest. Jon let the day's fatigue wash over him, grateful for a few hours of silence before dawn broke anew. bringing more arrivals and more demands. Sleep tugged at his consciousness, and as he drifted, he thought of Arya's final words, "We'll do it together." There was solace in that promise, even if the path ahead remained uncertain. Night passed swiftly. Joan's dreams were filled with half-formed images of wedding vows spoken beneath the heart tree, of flickering shadows of old kings and queens, and of Arya's face shifting between the carefree girl she had been and the mysterious warrior she had become. The fire guttered low, wrapping the chamber in soft, dancing shadows. Ghost slept deeply, stirring only once to rearrange his paws. Beyond the castle walls, snow continued its silent descent, burying footprints and layering the battlements in white. When morning arrived, it did so in a muted glow. The sky was a leaden sheet, streaked here and there with pale brightness. Jon awoke feeling slightly more rested than the previous day, but the tension of responsibilities lingered under his skin. He dressed swiftly, sliding his arms into the sleeves of a heavy black doublet trimmed with dark gray fur, then fastening his sword belt. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. A young page peeked in, eyes wide with nerves. "Your Grace," the boy said, "Lord Manderley requests a meeting in the solar as soon as you can attend. There's also a matter with Lord Serwyn's steward about supply wagons." "Dan settle." Jon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll be there." The page bobbed his head and disappeared. He steeled himself for another round of obligations, though a part of him held on to the promise he'd made to Arya, that they might find a moment of respite again today. Even a short walk in the Godswood or a quiet meal away from the prying eyes would suffice. With that intention fueling him, he strode out, Ghost at his heels. The corridor was already alive with motion. Servants carrying trays, knights in conversation, the air thick with the scent of burning wood and warm breakfast. In the solar, he found Lord Manderley, Sansa, and a few stewards hunched over a table spread with maps and lists. As soon as Jon entered, Lord Manderley launched into a cheerful summary of shipping schedules from White Harbor. The conversation was surprisingly amicable. Evidently, Manderley had secured enough transport to bring additional grains and salted fish to feed the influx of guests. Sansa discussed how best to store the supplies, referencing notes about Winterfell's expanded granaries. Jon contributed where he could, agreeing to arrange a short-term lodging for some of Manderley's servants. After half an hour, they concluded with mutual satisfaction. Manderley left to finalize details, promising to meet again in the evening. Sansa lingered, rubbing her temples. "They keep coming," she murmured, glancing at the door as though expecting another line of lords to appear. "But we're managing, I suppose." Jon offered a tired smile. "We are. I only hope we can do more than just manage. People need to see Winterfell as strong, not overwhelmed." "And?" Sansa's eyes flicked over him, softening. "You look tired, brother. Or..." She paused, lips quirking with mild amusement. "Cousin?" Neither title feels quite right. A pang went through him, but he returned her smile. "We grew up as siblings. That's enough." She nodded, letting it drop. "Try to rest if you can. We have more arrivals expected. Some of the lesser houses from the Rills region. They might cause trouble, or they might just slip in quietly. Hard to predict. In any case, I'll handle it. You don't need to stand by the gate for every new face." "Now?" He exhaled gratefully. "Thank you. If anyone needs me, I'll be around. Possibly in the courtyard." She patted his arm in a rare show of affection. "Good luck." Then she moved off, presumably to organize the castle staff. Jon stepped into the corridor, paused, then made his way to the courtyard. Snow crunched underfoot, and the light seemed brighter for the fresh coating that fell overnight. Guards patrolled the walls, their cloaks dusted in white. A stable hand led a pair of shaggy northern horses across the yard, leaving hoofprints in the snow. Voices carried from behind the stables. The ring of steel hinted at men practicing. He drifted toward the sounds, following them to a practice area near the armory. A handful of knights, perhaps from different houses, were sparring with dulled blades. One recognized Jon and lowered his sword with a quick salute. He nodded in return, scanning for Arya. He spotted her near the far corner of the yard, speaking with an unfamiliar figure in simple leathers. The man looked to be a sellsword or hired guard. Arya's posture was guarded but not hostile. John approached, catching a fragment of their conversation. The man spoke low, glancing around nervously. Arya tilted her head, expression set, responding in clipped tones. When John came within earshot, she broke off and turned to him. The man, noticing John's presence, gave a half-bow, mumbled an apology, and hurried away. Arya watched him go, lips pressed tight. "Is everything all right?" John asked, glancing after the man. She nodded slowly, though her eyes were pensive. He was complaining about coin. Apparently, he was hired by a lesser house to guard their baggage and got stiffed. He thought maybe I could intervene, or you could. She exhaled. I told him we're not here to settle every petty dispute over wages, but I'll mention it to Sansa. John rubbed the back of his neck. It's always something, isn't it? A flicker of amusement lit her gaze. Seems so. She paused, glancing around the courtyard. Do you have any pressing matters? Or can you spare a few moments? He took a step closer, lowering his voice. I can spare a bit of time. Did you want to go somewhere? Never one. Never. She motioned toward the gates, leading beyond Winterfell's walls. Just a short walk. I need to stretch my legs. Sometimes it feels like the walls are closing in. Don't worry, we won't go far. John considered, a sudden lift in his chest. All right, let's go. He whistled softly for Ghost, who was trotting by the stables. The dire wolf loped over, ears pricked, and fell in beside them. They passed through the main gate, exchanging a few words with the guards on duty, and stepped into the open land just beyond the castle walls. A gentle slope descended toward fields, lined with leafless trees, their branches glittering with ice. The snow here was untouched, except for the tracks of small animals. The sky seemed broader, though still heavy with low gray clouds. A breeze carried the scent of pine from the distant forest. They walked side by side, their breaths visible in the cold air. John felt tension ease from his shoulders, with each crunch of boots on fresh snow. Ghost wove around them, occasionally sniffing at a shrub, or pressing his nose to the ground in search of hidden scents. Arya let out a long breath, lifting her face to the chill wind. Better, she murmured. I can think out here. John nodded. Sometimes I forget how much I need open spaces. Winterfell's walls are comforting, but they can feel like a cage on days like these. They crested a small rise, coming to a halt beneath a skeletal oak tree. Its branches, coated in frost, creaked faintly as the wind brushed them. The castle loomed behind, a cluster of towers and battlements that seemed both imposing and familiar. Arya turned to face him, her cloak swirling around her ankles. I wanted to say, I appreciate what you said yesterday. About not chaining me, about letting me be who I am. I've been thinking on it. He studied her face, the wind teasing strands of her dark hair free from her braid. And what do you think? She pursed her lips. I think it's going to be a tricky line to walk. I'm not a typical bride, but I meant it when I told you I trust you, and if we're in this together I won't vanish in the night. You have my word. A gentle warmth spread in his chest. Your word means everything, and you have mine as well. I'll do whatever I can to keep you free. And they stood there, the hush of the fields around them, the distant silhouette of Winterfell, a reminder of the responsibilities waiting. For a moment, it felt as though they inhabited a world of their own, beyond titles and alliances. Arya gestured at Ghost, who sat a few paces away, his ears perked. He's been your companion through so much. Do you think he senses the changes in you? Nay. Then some more. John glanced at the direwolf, remembering battles fought side by side, the times Ghost saved him from ambush, the nights he slept pressed against Ghost's warm fur on the cold ground. He senses more than we know, but he remains loyal, no matter what name or title I bear. Arya's gaze softened. Direwolves are like that. They bind to us in ways deeper than any vow. John felt a pang for the other Starks who had lost their direwolves along the way. Robb, Rickon, even Sansa. Only Ghost and Nymeria remained. and Arya's Nymeria roamed the wilderness with her own pack, free and untamed. He wondered if Arya thought of her wolf often. She seemed to read his thoughts. Sometimes I dream of Nymeria. I see her running through dark forests, leading her pack under moonlight. I can't tell if they're just dreams or something else. Either way, I'm glad she's out there free. Jon reached for her hand, a small tentative gesture in that empty expanse of snow. She let him take it, though she kept her posture poised, as if ready for anything. Her gloved fingers tightened around his. We're free too. In our own way, he said, voice low. Despite everything. She breathed a soft laugh. It doesn't feel like it sometimes, but maybe you're right. A gust of wind swept across the fields, stirring the hems of their cloaks and causing the bare oak branches to rattle. Ghost lifted his head, sniffing the air, then trotted closer to them, as if to herd them back to the castle. Arya smiled wryly at the wolf's intuition. He's probably right, she said. We shouldn't stay out here too long. People will worry, or they'll gossip. Jon sighed, releasing her hand. Let them gossip, but yes, we should go back. At least we had a moment's peace. They made their way down the gentle slope, Ghost weaving around them. The sight of the castle grew nearer, the banners on the ramparts limp in the cold breeze. As they approached, a guard stood to attention, politely refraining from remarking on how long they'd been gone. Stepping through the gates, Jon felt the weight of his responsibilities settle over him once more. The courtyard was busier than ever, with new groups of visitors milling about, their cloaks dusted white. He exchanged a look with Arya, reading the same resigned determination in her eyes. They would face it together, for better or worse. Arya headed off to speak with a group of guards, and Jon turned to the main keep, determined to check in on Sansa and see what new demands awaited. As he crossed the yard, a snippet of conversation between two men caught his ear. Something about new arrivals from the south, possibly from Storm's End. It never ended, this flow of guests. He braced himself for yet more courtesy and negotiation. Yet beneath his outward composure, a quiet resolve burned. He was not alone in this. Arya stood by him, and together they would build something beyond the realm's expectations, something stronger than the tangled politics that had ensnared them both. That certainty guided his steps as he re-entered Winterfell's winding corridors, the murmurs of lords and knights echoing faintly behind him,